Awesome, thank you. Yeah, sorry, you have to listen to my American accent for the next 25 minutes. It's a shame. Yeah, so today I wanted to talk about redlining the SOC. People that know me well know I used to race, big into cars, motorcycles, things like that. And the thing in racing, the first thing that they teach you is that you want to go fast, but you need to control it, because uncontrolled speed is the first way to have something terrible happen. So it's just a faster way to make a bad decision, or have a catastrophe happen. So want to talk about how we can apply that same principle to your SOC operations today. All right, so who the hell am I? That's me. I work in security operations for Exabeam. So yeah, I've personally watched an alert sit in a queue for a really long time. I also work across detection, AppSec, GRC, legal, and security strategy, so I do a little bit of everything. Means I get to watch both the technical and operational sides of things fall at the same time. Teach cybersecurity policy and management for uni. I'm told that's what you guys call it. College is something else. Yeah, I study law as well. I'm a second-year law student, about to go into my third year. You have to know the laws to break them is my personal motto. And then finally, I'm also an incident commander for US military, so I get to see some interesting things. And turns out, we'll look at it tomorrow, is not a good IR strategy. All right. Scott says, have we considered buying more shit? I'm here to tell you to stop buying shit. This is the obvious answer to every SOC problem that people give you, right? Everyone's saying, oh, you need a faster SIM, you need more telemetry, you need AI assistance, you need to make more dashboards, you need to automate things. But of course, each one of these is a different tool that they want you to buy. Technology can be the problem. However, I work for a SIM vendor, so I'm sure they hate that I'm telling you to stop buying things, but all SIM tools, for the most part, they also hate when I say this, do the same thing. Most of the time, the largest delays are not caused by a bad SIM tool or anything. It is your processes and your operating model that are surrounding the SIM. So an alert can arrive quickly, but it'll sit in a queue forever. An analyst will open it and then have to look for a bunch of things, and it just ends up sitting there forever, collecting dust. That's a lot of time for an attacker to move through your environment. So, just the answer is not buying more things. The answer is the things that we're going to talk about. All right, so how has AI changed cyber? I mean, we're all sick of hearing about AI at this point, right? And the reality is the attacks are compressing by a lot. So the operating model is starting to matter a little bit more. Here's some cool statistics. The average e-crime breakout time at this moment is 29 minutes. 27 seconds was the average fastest observed breakout. There's been an 89% uptick in AI-enabled adversary activity. And then 82% of detections recently, which this has been a really interesting statistic as someone who works for a SIM vendor, have been malware-free. So how do we detect those things, right? There's no signatures, there's no hashes to look for. I don't want to sit there and focus on that 27 seconds number or anything specific. But when the attack path is moving in minutes or seconds, or it's faster at the end of the day, and we need to change our processes to match that. When they're happening in minutes and seconds, we'll look at this tomorrow morning, isn't good enough anymore. So this is something that I've been talking to a lot of customers about. Assume access. We're no longer in a state of security where we can say, oh, we're going to be impenetrable, nobody's ever going to get in. At this point, with the speed that things are moving, somebody someday is going to get in. A breach is not a matter of if anymore, it's a matter of when. So I'm not saying, I use a castle analogy, I think, with a lot of customers. I'm not saying the castle sucks. Your walls still matter. Patching matters, MFA matters. The things that you're doing to secure your environment matter. However, your modern defense model, your SOC modernization model, you can't assume that the walls are going to stop every attacker forever, because that's just not realistic anymore. Someone is going to steal a credential. A token is going to be abused. A vendor will be compromised that you use. Supply chain is all the rage right now. That's going to happen. So the castle needs more than walls. You need your watchtowers. You need your guards that can immediately detect and kind of detain whoever tries to get in. Things along those lines. Countermeasures at this point are the things that we should be focusing on in our SOC operations, and not just keeping folks from getting in. So assuming access doesn't mean surrendering that prevention. I don't want people to go away from this talk saying, well, Gab said that I don't need to have defenses in place anymore because people are going to get in anyway. That's not the takeaway. It just means prevention shouldn't be your only plan. All right, so the race here is loop versus loop. You've got your attacker loop. This is simplified, obviously, but the attacker's loop is relatively simple. You find, you access, you move, and you profit. Each successful step creates a lot of momentum for that next step. However, the defender step, in many SOC operations that I've seen, you've got the alert. It sits in the queue. Your analyst picks it up. They're like, oh, it needs enrichment. It goes to Slack. There's a ticket. Then it goes to the manager, then the asset owner. And then suddenly there's this conversation of who owns this. I know everyone in this room has had that conversation at some point. Then there's a meeting and approval and containment. And that takes a lot longer than it can take the attacker to find and access and move through your environment. So you might have more tools, you might have better data, you might have more people, and you can still lose because you have a lot of latency in your processes. An attacker doesn't pause lateral movement because your tier 1 analyst is waiting for your incident commander to join a call. They're not really sitting there waiting for your ticket to go through so that they can continue to attack your environment, So the objective isn't to remove every human decision. I know that's the area that a lot of vendors are trying to get folks to go, is the fully autonomous SOC, right? But we can remove unnecessary waiting around some of those decisions that make a big difference. All right, so story time. This is a story of, I call this story the alert that sat for 23 minutes. I know it's really creative. I had a customer, a Fortune 500 company, not with my current company, but a previous vendor I worked with. They experienced a ransomware incident. When we were doing a postmortem, they really expected it to be a detection gap or a tooling issue. They were like, all right, what vendor can we stick this to, who didn't do their job right? The EDR that they were using flagged suspicious PowerShell activity 1 minute after execution, which is pretty solid. The alert was sent to the SIM instantly, so EDR and SIM doing their job. As you can see in the corner, SIM would like the record to reflect that it did its job. The alert hit a triage queue. There were many items in the triage queue, and the analyst didn't triage it for 23 minutes because it wasn't prioritized. There was just a lot sitting there. That's a pretty normal time frame, right? The alert didn't have enough enrichment, so we had to do some digging. There wasn't asset criticality assigned to anything. No user context, no threat scoring. So the analyst wasn't really sure that it was a true threat, and they slowly escalated. They were like, oh, by the way, we got this alert, it looks kind of weird, can you look at it? By the time containment began, the attacker had already begun to move laterally and had started encrypting data in the environment. So total dwell time was 41 minutes, and the detection was quick, tooling was solid, there was nothing wrong in that aspect, but the alert stalled, sat in the clunky manual queue that it was sitting in, and no one seemed to know whether it was urgent or not. And I think that's really, it wasn't that it was ignored, there was just a lack of information surrounding it. All right, so lesson learned. Your alerts are fine, your workflow just sucks. We optimize query latency because it's easy to measure, right? We redesign dashboards because especially your executives like to see dashboards. They like to look at pretty charts and see that things look nice. We shorten playbooks because they're too long, they're too involved. And we focus on ticket closure time because leadership has a report for it, right? Your mean time to X. Meanwhile, the real time blades that I've seen people struggle with are your queue wait times, the time it takes to gather context around some of these attacks, your approval latency, fragmented communications and investigations that restart every time the alert changes hands. You've got your tier 1 analyst, they hand it off to the tier 2 when it starts over. It's like resetting a timer. So I'm not saying query performance doesn't matter. These blind spots, these things on this blind spot do matter. However, shaving 5 seconds off a search is pretty irrelevant when the alert sits there for 23 minutes before someone's able to action on it. All right, someone told me recently, and this has stuck with me. I say it a lot, I parrot it a lot now. I stole it from whoever told it to me. Someone told me that defending is really hard because you have to get it right every single time, but attackers only have to get it right once. And AI doesn't need to invent a revolutionary new attack technique to matter. It only has to make existing attacks cheaper and easier for people to do. So it can reduce the time needed to reach a target. It can generate more convincing variations of a lure, can help prioritize vulnerabilities, modify scripts, things along those lines. None of those capabilities guarantee a perfect attack, but perfection isn't what the attackers need. They need acceptable attacks at a greater scale and lower cost, and they will eventually get something. So that means we, as defenders, need to expect more attempts, more variation, and less time between those steps that we use as far as incident response. So, when your access looks legitimate, when an attacker uses a valid credential, there might not be a malicious file to catch. That 80% of attacks didn't include malware. That's a big signal. Attackers are getting much better at masking legitimate access. So if an active session's abused, the authentication might look normal, successful. If a service account is compromised, the activity might look like routine automation. So the same problem also extends to your AI agents, which is what everyone's been talking about. An agent can be authorized, uncompromised, operating with legitimate credentials, but still performing actions outside of its purpose. I mean, look at the news over the last couple weeks, right? Why are we breaching containment? This is where your behavioral analytics becomes really important and context surrounding your alerts. What does this user normally access? What services or what sequences does this service follow? What tools does this agent usually use? On whose behalf does it act? So access will tell us who or what got in, but the behavior and the context surrounding these alerts is what's really important to be able to action them quickly. All right, so now that I've talked about this and all these problems, how do we fix them? So, method 1, detect behavior, like I was just talking about, not just indicators. Indicators are useful, but they're fragile. IP addresses change, domains rotate, payloads can be modified. A stolen credential can produce no known bad indicators. Behavior is harder to disguise completely because the attacker still has to accomplish something. So they have to authenticate, change privileges, access data. Eventually, something will look off. So you have to treat these detections like production software. Start with a hypothesis, version the logic, test it against known activity, replay realistic behavior, measure false positives and false negatives. The goal isn't more detections. You don't want alert fatigue, but you want detections that you can prepare to act on quickly. Method 2, this is one of the ones that I talk with customers a lot about. I have so many customers with a SIM tool that are like, oh, we set up our SIM and we're not getting anything from it. Okay, well, are you normalizing your logs? Are you enriching your data? Well, no, I didn't know I had to do that. Okay, well, care and feeding of your SIM, really important. Speed isn't delivering an alert 3 seconds sooner. Speed is making sure that when your analyst opens it, the information needed to make a decision is already there. You can see these 2 alerts. We've got the one on the left, suspicious PowerShell activity. We've got a host and a user. That's not helpful. On the right, however, we've got, it's a domain admin account. It's a first PowerShell execution in 90 days. It's a finance production server. User privilege changed 11 minutes ago. Impossible travel authentication, and 3 peer hosts contacted. That gives you a lot more context to make a decision very quickly. So underlying activity could be the same. Second alert is a lot more actionable because the context has already been assembled. Every investigation should begin as close as possible to the decision point. You shouldn't have to do a scavenger hunt every single time you get a SIM alert. And while it does take more work up front, it's a lot more worth it when you're in the throes of an investigation. This one is one of my favorites. Automate confidence, not severity. A lot of these SIM tools, your agentic, your SOAR, all of these buzzword capabilities are saying, like a severe alert, we can automate certain things so that it shuts down immediately. That is not what you want. Severity describes, by definition, how bad an event can be. Confidence describes how certain we are that the event is what we think it is. Those are really different questions. Like a high severity alert with weak evidence should not automatically isolate a critical production system. A high confidence event on low impact endpoint might be an excellent candidate for some automated but reversible containment. In the lower confidence quadrants, AI can gather evidence, correlate activity, prepare a response. As confidence increases, automation can take more action, but critical assets and high blast radius decisions should still have a human in the loop. So the machine can prepare a decision, but it doesn't mean it should always authorize the consequence. And when you start looking at confidence versus severity, I find that automation tends to be a lot more effective. You have a lot fewer people screaming when something gets shut off. It tends to be a better outcome. All right, method 4, put brakes on automation. Brakes are not evidence that a vehicle is slow. Brakes are what allow it to move quickly without becoming uncontrollable. Same is true for automation. With all of these considerations, scope, context, approval, rollback, audit, there are questions to be asked, and there needs to be a way to document the autonomy that we are giving certain systems. So the goal here is speed that you can reverse if you need to, and you don't want anything automated that just cannot be controlled. All right, and final method, defend your speed surfaces. These are all places where attackers gain speed in your environment. Identity is one of those places, exposure, cloud and SaaS, all of these things. A SOC can't defend machine speed activity if you're only looking at your endpoint. And that's just, yeah. So, at this point, you might need to buy some shit, but it's not all the stuff that people are trying to get you to buy. Really just depends on what you need, but visibility into all these surfaces, your entire attack surface, is what's extremely important here as well. So here's a checklist for you. Number 1, assume access. Keep investing in prevention, but stop pretending that your prevention is infallible, because it's not. Somebody's going to get in eventually. Somebody's going to click on something, do something stupid. Second, detect your behavior. Look at what the user, entity, workload, or agent does after access is granted. Third, enrich before triage. Put context at the point of decision. Automate your confidence, not merely severity. Limit your blast radius, scope permissions, preserve your human judgment for consequential actions, and make automation reversible. Make sure you have those breaks there. And then finally, close the loop. Every incident and every analyst decision should improve the next decision, next detection, enrichment process, or response playbook. And that is the end of my 25 minutes, 24 minutes, whatever. Any questions? You're gonna have to yell if you do have questions because there's no mics to be handed around. So if not, find me outside after and we can chat. I didn't mean that to sound threatening. That sounded kind of threatening. That was a little threatening. All right, I don't see any questions, so thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a good con.